I'm Nat. I work at an organisation called Exceptional Individuals. We support neurodiverse individuals, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, as well as a whole heap of other ones. And as someone who is on the spectrum myself, there's a lot of characteristics with ADHD which I'm not diagnosed with that I do resonate with. We did a workshop a while back on ADHD. And just to clarify, when we're talking about ADHD, we're also talking about ADD. So it doesn't have to be hyperactive to have ADHD. So though I'm only going to be referring it to ADHD, I'm including it all. And the same with autism. We're going to be including, Asperger's, atypical autism, any of those names that you might resonate with. Because when you're being diagnosed, there's two assessments. And interestingly, it was only fairly recently where it was even possible to be diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So if any of you have been diagnosed for several years now, it's very possible that you may have both, but it was completely overlooked. And whether or not that's important to you, I think that's a personal decision, but at least have some awareness where the overlaps happen and what maybe you have both and you're not sure, well, what's the autism, what's the ADHD, or maybe you're diagnosed with autism, but I don't know, there's something about ADHD that you really resonate with, or vice versa. So Mena says, could you please pass the research to me, Nat? I'm a dyslexic teacher. Absolutely, just reach out the end via email and I can send you references. Dov is diagnosed with both. And actually, that's a good thing. What Mena reminded me of is I have done a lot of research on today's presentation. However, it's a very emerging area. There's still much more research that needs to be done. And when I'm going to be saying, well, this is one thing, this is another, take it with a pinch of salt, okay? Because what we're talking about is the frequency. So if I say this is an ADHD symptom, I'm not saying people with autism who do not have ADHD cannot have it. I'm just on about the likelihood and going with how you officially diagnose someone. So yeah, but feel free to disagree with me. I'm always up for being challenged, but just so you know, I do fully appreciate that there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. So as I say, this is our organisation, and you know that a lot of you have been in come many a times, but we're based in the UK, though we do work worldwide. So if any of you are interested, we primarily support adults, so anyone who is of working age. So maybe you've got children and eventually you think, oh, I wouldn't mind them working with us. Absolutely, but just know we specialise in adults. John says, I'm waiting to be sent for an ADHD diagnosis, but have fairly extreme stimming behaviour. Thanks for opening up. Zach says, will we get the slides? You can get the slides. So all our webinars you can check on our YouTube channel. All right, that's enough of all the nice stuff. There's a lot about our organisation online. So autism v ADHD. It sounds like they're about to go into a battle royale. They're not working against each other. A lot of the time they work, I don't know if harmony is the right word, but they are like two peas in a pod. There's in terms of like the science, they have similar genes, but interestingly, there isn't an exact ADHD or an exact autism gene that we've been able to find. For instance, some people can have different genes but still have autism, where dyslexia is a little bit more consistent. So in a nutshell, and I hope you appreciate this lovely squirrel. I believe it's a squirrel. It might be a chipmunk. It's not a British one. I don't know what it is, but it's cute. But ADHD, in a nutshell, is a neurodevelopmental disorder. I hate the terminology. It's negative, but this is what they call it. So remember, not my words. I would word it slightly differently, but this is the official way. So a neurodevelopmental disorder that can involve difficulties with attention, hyperactivity, for some people, not all people, and impulse control. Whereas autism, on the other hand, is defined broadly as a spectrum where you can be all across the line in terms of how much it affects you and in terms of what area, that affects a person's social communication and interaction in various contexts. As we go along today, you'll realise how some are nearly indistinguishable, where others seem to like dramatically contrast each other. And that's the thing with co-occurring conditions, which most people who are neurodivergent do have multiple, even if they're only diagnosed with one, is sometimes they seem like a dramatic contradiction. And I guess they are, but you still have them. So how can you be hyperactive as well as reserved? How can you have a love of repetitive behavior, but also the need to be spontaneous? They kind of, mesh, but they do go together. So here is the quick 101, the relationship between autism and ADHD. I'm going to go into a lot more information, but this is like the top level. First of all, there is overlap. There's quite a lot of overlaps. It is definitely possible to have ASD and ADHD. That's autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But before 2013, in the US, doctors weren't allowed to diagnose you with both. So essentially, they'd look at your symptoms, and if you met the criteria for one, whichever one you kind of had the most of, that's the one you'd get given. The danger with that is that, yes, one might have more symptoms than the other one, but if say one of your symptoms of ADHD, which you're not diagnosed for, is not being treated or supported or nurtured, the autism stuff isn't going to help it. It's like I often say with dyslexia and dyspraxia, though they overlap a lot and though some of the outputs are very similar, if you're trying to help someone with dyspraxia via techniques created for dyslexics, it's not going to work. And this is why today is hopefully quite important. So we said, agree there's negative definitions. They could equally define both by language focused on ability rather than only disability. I mean, that's definitely what Exceptional Individuals was founded on. It's about a strength-based approach. I think you can acknowledge the difficulties and appreciate the positives without undermining either one of them. So this is a lot, all right? There's a lot of information on this one, but it's just to show you on a one-page slide how they overlap. So you've got ADHD, which is impulsivity, so I have to do something. Short attention span, squirrel. Poor working memory, poor planning skills. Time blindness, meaning that, someone says, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Depression when understimulated. For instance, if I'm just like in my own space, not listening to music or doing something with my hands, I can get a bit low. And I'm not talking about crippling depression, but still it's noticeable. Little sense of danger. Who has, always been told that you have no fear? And it's a compliment. I remember a while back, I was on rock climbing, my backpack fell off a cliff and it was hanging, and I was like, I'll just go get that. And everyone was like, don't do that. And I didn't see anything wrong with it. Next thing I know, I'm stuck on a cliff for a few hours. It was a right fuffle. But it's just it's this like lack of awareness of your surroundings, which is similar to autism, but autism is more in a social sense, making careless mistakes. For instance, with dyslexia, you might make spelling mistakes, but that's because of how the brain processes the information. With ADHD, in theory, there's no issue, but you still make mistakes, which kind of shouldn't be there. And if you're not interested in it, forget about it. Autism, on the other hand, can take things very literally. It's raining cats and dogs. No, it's not. It's raining rain. Having the same routine and getting anxious if it changes, repetition can be quite soothing for those on the autistic spectrum. Whereas with ADHD, not so much. I like to carefully plan things before they happen. And again, I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with these things, but please remember, this is for the overview, what most people demonstrate. You can never make a diagnosis for everyone, particularly when you realise how individual and unique autism is. Likely to carefully plan before they happen, not understanding social rules. Society has loads of rules, but no one ever writes them down. They always expect you to just know them. Apparently, it's rude to put your feet on the table. Who would have known? getting upset when someone touches you, getting very anxious. So those are the set things, but it's the middle thing we're interested in. This is where things get interesting, and this is where issues can arrive. So we've got sensory issues. Both conditions can struggle with like too much light, too much sound, any one of those senses. Hyperfixation. Kind of think of that like OCD, when the brain gets kind of stuck on something. Stimming is when you do like rapid movements, and that's when you have like a built up energy, and it's kind of a way to like release yourself. Auditory processing disorder. Maybe someone says something to you and you struggle to like take the auditory information and convert it. Talking a lot, just like I am now, but thankfully I'm in an environment where it's actually helpful. Finding it hard to make friends, forever alone. We'll get onto that a bit more later. Being uncomfortable making eye contact with others. Yes, it's uncomfortable to make eye contact, but it doesn't mean, you know, like I burn and turn to mush. Some people think like, oh my god, I made eye contact with you, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's fine. And a few other things. So this is an overview. So ADHD or ASD, being easily distracted. So being distracted, is it ASD, ADHD, or both? Yeah, it is ADHD. And where some of you may say both, this is again where it gets a bit complicated. I'm referring to how they diagnose it, all right? Not in real world scenarios. So when you're looking at how you diagnose, being easily distracted is a characteristic or trait of ADHD and not autism. But remember what today is all about. It's about having ADHD and autism. So of course, if any of you said both, you're not wrong. That's just not the answer that people look for when they are looking at the criteria during assessments. Okay, 2 of 7. Lack of concentration or ability to react to other people's emotions or feelings. What are we talking? Is it on the spectrum? Is it ADHD? Or does it overlap on both considerably? I'm curious to know as well the term on the spectrum, if you find it offensive or not. For me, I do not, but I know some people do. So I am aware of that. Okay, it is both. Now that is, again, it's one that a lot of people kind of automatically think it refers to ASD. But lack of concentration or ability to react to other people's emotion. So lack of concentration is the ADHD side. Ability to react to other people's emotions or feeling is autism. But even with ADHD, you can struggle with people's emotions and feelings, though sometimes it's for a slightly different reason. With autism, maybe you're looking at people's facial expressions and your brain is unable to decipher what they mean. With ADHD, if someone is essentially not stimulating your brain, though you definitely are able to decode it, your brain is seeing it as useless information. So over. So it's quite an interesting question, actually, because you can have this symptom or characteristic and only be ADHD or only be autism, because the reason it happens is in two separate ways. Alternatively, it can be comorbidity or co-occurring, and that's when they overlap. If you're a bit confused, hold on with me, because by the end of today, you should have a good understanding about what is one and what is the other, to hopefully a practical usage. 3 to 7. Which one is a symptom of ASD? Difficulty focusing or concentrating and narrowing attention, repetitive motion such as rocking and twisting, and trouble sitting still. I definitely should have made these questions a bit longer, so if you've struggled to keep up, that's on me, that's not you. Sanjan says, don't mind on the spectrum, but the interception at worst case scenario, i.e. autism. Okay, all of them. Which one is a symptom? Now, repetitive movement such as rocking or twisting is a symptom of autism. Yes, people with ADHD typically might struggle to sit still, but again, that comes to the body not being as stimulated. When we're looking at the symptom, it's definitely an autistic thing. And one of you already mentioned it earlier, stimming. This is when, you could rock. This is when you could say like meow, similar to like OCD. I'm always saying cat sounds. I love it. And it's just the way of the brain when there's so much information. Think of it like breathing, like, but you're just kind of doing it in a different way. I often explain it to people like swearing. None of us need to swear. No, we can all help if we really want to, but we do not because it's a release. It makes you feel better. It's like a quick kind of like boost of like relaxation in a stressful moment. And the same thing is very true with ASD, even though the way it demonstrates itself can be quite different. 407. Unresponsive to common stimuli. So this is like sensory information. Autism, ADHD, or both. So does not react great to normal stimulus like talking, sound, visuals. Very interesting. Now, it is autism, and the reason is that with ADHD, typically you can kind of get distracted fairly easy with even very mild stimuli. So maybe there's a sound or like a bark or someone says, "Hey, you over there," or like a cold breeze, like anything could kind of swip your attention. But with ASD, sometimes it's the opposite. So maybe someone's talking to you, and unless they say your name, you do not register that you're having a conversation. When like a good example is when I was in school, like my name's Nathaniel, and a teacher would say, Nathan, do you mind getting that? I would ignore them 100% of the time. And that's because my brain just didn't respond to that stimuli, which definitely isn't my name, but is similar enough that you should be able to guess that they're referring to you. But yet someone with ADHD, someone might say, nah, I'm okay. And that nah is near enough to Nathaniel that I'd be like, whoop, whoop. So hopefully that makes it a bit clearer about why it's autism. Chloe says, can stimming be a presentation within both diagnosis? I only ask as the quiz mentioned that it is more ASC. I like that, autism spectrum condition. Again, I like that word more. I'm only going with how they officially say it, so good on you. However, the previous slide with the diagram depicted that it is present in both. Thank you. Yeah, no, all of these things are present in both. Everything we're mentioning can be in both, but it's more about how commonly they occur. So some things are definitely more related to one than the other. And when you go to your doctor or go for assessment, they're not saying, oh, you have no characteristics of ADHD. They'll look at which ones do you have and how much do they affect you and what ones are they most like common in. So yeah, they affect both. So there are going to be things in this that sound like they're contradicting each other. It's more the fact that some are just more common than others, but they do overlap completely. Interesting when you have both diagnoses, can be difficult knowing which condition it is causing by what symptoms. Absolutely, and that's something that I've always struggled with. I used to always think, why does it matter? It doesn't matter but it does matter. And that's because if you're trying to fix something with the wrong tool, you're not going to get good results. So maybe today will help you a little bit, but I can assure you it's not going to clear everything up 100%. Which one is a symptom of ADHD? Delayed developmental milestones, withdrawal behavior, interrupting conversations or activities. Yeah, this one is what most people refer to ADHD as interrupting conversations or activities. Absolutely, this can happen with autism, but typically people with autism can either be kind of interrupt you or they can be very reserved, where ADHD is near enough always interrupting. But remember, we are mainly focusing on like ADHD with the hyperactive and compulsiveness, but you can do it without the hyperactiveness. So you can still have that compulsion to interrupt someone, even if it's not hyperactive. Because that's something which a lot of people often mistake, and a lot of time in like women as well, ADHD just doesn't appear the same way as it does in males. And that's something that we should definitely be very conscious and aware of. Which one is a symptom of both? Lack of concentration or ability to react to other people's emotion, withdrawn behavior, or hyperactivity? Yes, it is the first one. So a lack of concentration or ability to react to other people's emotions. This occurs pretty evenly across both diagnoses. And yet withdrawn behavior is typically on autism, and hyperactivity is typically with ADHD. All right, I think we're on the last. Oh, no, here we are. Let's see who's winning today. Kari, congratulations. Very impressed. You know, you consider today a success already. Okay, now we're getting on to real world scenarios. So we've talked about the basics, which, let's face it, you could have just got off Wikipedia. But now we're going to be getting on to the real interesting things. So here's an example. What do the facial expressions in The Son of Man tell us about how he is feeling? Judy says she agrees with Angela about women, very different. ADHD has compositions to interrupt, but what happens if you interrupt people because you do not understand that people haven't finished speaking? You cannot read when they are finished. Would that be ADHD or both? Interesting question, and I can't give you a definitive answer, but that sounds more related to autism. So sometimes the output's the same, but the reason why you got to that output is different. There's no expression, i.e. blocked, can't tell, I don't know because that apple is covering his face, can't tell angry, don't perceive me, he's focusing on the apple, naturally not smiling but can't see anything, he doesn't want to know, no idea. And this one is commonly related to autism. So with autism, sometimes it's like having an apple in front of your face. You can't see the emotions, and it's just because your brain picks up on different cues. And it's the same in different cultures. In some cultures, we understand people's emotions by their eyes, and in other cultures, more by the mouth. And it doesn't mean one is better nor worse. It's just it has developed in that way. ADHD, though, normally it doesn't tend to be as much of an issue or something which causes difficulties navigating day-to-day life. So this one is more referred to autism. But yeah, who knows what he's saying. There are pictures on the internet of him without the apple, and he looks quite, not bothered. Okay, this one is prioritizing work. What order would you choose? And this can be very different depending on one or the other. Martin said he would just do number one. I think prioritizing work is definitely an ADHD symptom or characteristic. It's been able to either be overstimulated or understimulated, meaning that your brain is just like, I don't know where to begin, or this no longer interests me. You know exactly, like, you want to make that like a Lego house, and you're like, damn, I want to make this house. However, your brain's not interested in reading the instructions, so you'll just go do it. In this, when you've got to prioritize your work, you're ready to make that PowerPoint, but you maybe don't want to do the research. And this is very typical. Or maybe you're all right at creating a plan, but then sticking to it and following it is another matter. When on the autistic spectrum, and please bear in mind I'm oversimplifying and combining a massive demographic together, typically kind of prefer following instructions. With my colleagues who have ASD, I will write very, very detailed briefs that explain every step of the way. But with my colleagues who have ADHD, I normally give them a much more open brief They both have the same goal. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, I need the work done. But how they go about the work, I normally kind of prepare that a little bit different depending on the person. So we've got create a list, separate urgent from the important tasks, rank daily tasks by their true priority, do most important work first, separate tasks with small priorities. I don't know about any of you, but do you sometimes spend all day actually making a to-do list and that's what you've done in the day? You can be like, there is such a thing as being too organized. Oh, here's another quick question. Yes. How many planets are in the solar system? Hold with me on this. I know it seems overly random, but there is a point. Is there 8 planets, 9 planets, 12 planets, or 15 planets in our solar system? I can't speak for any others. I know this one's slightly controversial depending on when you were born. Yeah, Louise, do dwarf planets count? Really good point. It's 8 planets, and if you're counting Pluto, 9. However, if you're counting moons, or if you're counting ones which have recently been discovered, then it could be 12 or 15. Kinda, they're all correct in a way, depending on how you define the question, they're actually all correct. Though the normal answer is 8. And this comes down to like autism. If you do not explain the question fully, how can you answer it? The fact is all of you are right. 9, 8. It's because the question wasn't defined properly, and you might struggle to pick out what is the person actually asking. Are they asking the question from when I was born? Are they asking from my perspective? Are they asking what the UK government recognizes or the US government recognizes? And with ADHD, again, not so much an issue. You might get distracted on this, but you'll normally be able to assume that if this question came up on a pop quiz, we're going to be talking about 8. Personally, I like Pluto. I've got nothing against Pluto. Okay, this one is this person's face to the side or front on? And if any of you attended previous webinars, I've used a few of these for different slides, and I think they're a good demonstration of how the brain reacts differently depending on what neurodivergence you have. Oh, I like that. Slide with a 3. Both, front on, depends. With ADHD, maybe you'd look at this and you'd find it interesting because it does kind of boggle the mind, and it is quite a stimulating image. It requires you to dive in deep and to look at it. But with autism, this isn't this would be potentially quite a difficult question, or it'll be lots of like depends, or well this with an like there's always like an add-on. You tend to be like you'd go in deep rather than just say the answer that first pops in your head. So where ADHD might be more spontaneous, like, okay, definitely face on, definitely. Autism might be like, well, it's side, but also it's front on, though it could be. So it's like can be a bit more in depth. Part of me really hates being able to like pigeonhole and put all these things in boxes, but I think there is good to be taken from this approach, but just know that this isn't like the only approach. Dov says, depends on which solar system. Oh, we're on about planets. Yeah, her face is scary. I can't disagree with that. In terms of the answer, I think she's face on, but it's one of those things we may never know. The next one is an idea for a pointless invention. So just come up with something, no points if you say chocolate teapot. I get that every single time. But any other inventions? And this comes down to imagination. Is your brain able to populate new, wacky, like draw different things together? Or does it find it much easier to live in the world we like, very practical? So everything has a point. Ooh, a glow in the dark, blackout blind. Nice, I like that. A coat with an umbrella around the collar. Umbrella with glasses. Do you know what? I could do with that. A wheelless car, sugary toothpaste. Funny story, when I was younger, I had strawberry toothpaste that was definitely sugar. Top 10 with garden DIY style. I don't understand the questions. I think this is perfect. Water bottles that can't hold liquid. I've seen glow in the dark sunglasses before. Interesting. So yeah, on with ASD, this could be quite a hard question. It's just about like how the brain processes information. Can be quite a tough question. People with ADHD, however, typically are very good at coming up with ideas. It's just executing them. So actually, if you've got one, you're amazing at executing. If you have the idea, you know what you're doing, autism. ADHD, great at coming up with ideas, may struggle to implement. If you have both of them, however, this is when the brain can get quite torn and it can lead to like more burnout. So people with ADHD and autism tend to get burnt out more, tend to get more fatigued because the brain is saying one thing and then it's saying something else at the same time. So though these things contradict each other, you can definitely have it because this big meaty thing in our head isn't just one computer. It's like thousands and thousands of little computers. And one can be doing one action and the other can be doing the other action. And sometimes they butt heads. Automatic egg cracker that drops eggs onto the floor. Ooh. Do you know what? I do love this question. You always get some really cool answers. Okay, I get told I am inappropriate in public. Trust me, I get it all the time. People with autism can be inappropriate because they might not read the social situation or know the rule book to life, where ADHD is more about not understanding cues. So though the same thing is maybe both people have been inappropriate, the reason is because with people with autism might know when the right, might find it difficult to understand what the question is actually asking. Where ADHD is more about knowing when you jump in. I'm sure you've all been on video calls and you're always interrupting people because there's like a bit of delay. But imagine that, or something you may not have to imagine, for everyday life. Martin says, as an autistic, I don't get told it, that as I mainly refuse to interact with people. Oh, I see what you're saying. So if you're not interacting with people, they can't say you're inappropriate. I just have to embrace it, to be honest with you. It's a thing which people always say, stop doing that. It's just how your brain works. Rose says, it's taken me too long to process what the question is asking. I'm assuming that more autism spectrum condition, but when I'm processing the question, random inventions, I can come up with loads of ideas, ADHD. That's a really good way of showing how you could have both. This one is, how would you rather stay active? With ADHD, it can be a very physical condition. It can be something that makes you want to move around. It doesn't just have to be verbal. Autism isn't really a verbal condition. It's not, you don't have to physically move. Yes, you can do like stimming, but in terms of like, okay, I have to dance or I have to use this energy up, not so much. So I would say predominantly ADHD for like having to physically burn off energy, yet both of them for sleeping. And why? Because having ADHD can be very, very draining. You end up you've got a whole day's worth of energy. With ADHD, you might use it all up in like the first section of the day, and then you'll be tired throughout and then wide awake at night. With autism, every single day you're navigating a world which doesn't speak the same language as you, so it wears you out. So again, very different reasons, but very similar symptoms. So maybe hopefully you're starting to realize why it's so difficult to diagnose someone with both. And this is why when they are diagnosing people, they've just got to say, okay, this affects this person a great deal, and essentially just pick which one matches up the most. That is changing since 2013, but we are still in very early days of understanding comorbidity / co-occurring conditions to a respectable level. Especially when masking, super draining. Yes, Lee. Masking, for those of you who do not know, is when you pretend to be normal as part of society. So you need to make eye contact, you need to make small talk, and yet it's not natural to you, so it's very draining. Louise says, I really like dancing, but not to use it up more because it's safe and makes me understand my emotions. More based on how I decide to dance. Yes, a lot of people with ADHD, for instance, might be more shall we say, experimental dancers rather than like very structured dancers. Like salsa, I found really boring. It's great. I'm not trying to diss it, but you know how you got to do the same movements quite a lot. I prefer just kind of, raving because you can kind of just express yourself just by moving. It's not in a particular pattern. Trampolining as stimming, yes. I can't work out the difference between masking and practicing what has been taught as part of a social development. That's a really, really interesting question. I guess we naturally, with autism is a lifelong condition, but it can get easier as you grow, but that's more related to masking. ADHD, however, is lifelong for some individuals, but quite a lot of people, I believe 1/3 or 2/3, actually outgrow most of the symptoms. And I think that's where it can be one or the other. Sanjan says, I'm definitely experimental dancer. Kind of want to see it now. Dancing, but love sleeping. Yes, do both. I agree to the experimental dancing. There's this really good episode in Peep Show where they do experimental dancing. If any of you seen it, it's a perfect definition of it. All right, what would you consider Deadpool, a good or a bad human being? So if any of you have seen the Ryan Reynolds Fox/Disney movies now, is he a good person or a bad person? People with ADHD, this probably isn't going to affect him a great deal, but with autism, this is a tough question because there's so many different factors. Angela says voting and hearing is stressful. Do you know what? In that case, you do not bother because I really don't want anyone to get stressed out. This helps some people concentrate, but for other people, it's not for them. It's why it's very, very much optional. All children and adults are taught to mask their behaviour as part of conforming to society. Very true. Neither/both. He's consistent. Lots to consider. Yes. Will you be able to talk a bit more about navigating the assessment process here in the UK? Hi, Judy. No, but I will have a webinar coming up which goes into a lot more detail about how to get a diagnosis for each. Unfortunately, I won't have time to do it in this particular one. Did you say 1/3 outgrow ADHD? When is it likely to happen over 21 years of age or later? It's typically, Rafa, it's typically in childhood that you outgrow ADHD if you're going to. If you haven't done it by that point, most likely it's for life. Personally, I think it's a lifelong thing, and I think you get better at masking, but the research has shown that about 1/3 to 2/3. Kat, no one is really 100% good or bad. Great one, Kat. So a lot of you are starting to get the idea. On the surface, okay, Deadpool, he kills people, bad guy. He saves the world and ends up saving more lives than he kills. Good guy? It's hard to say. Interestingly, no one said he's a bad guy. He's a bit of a jerk sometimes, but it can be quite difficult. So if you are a person who very much struggles with reading emotions and kind of like nuances, things which there's not really a right or a wrong answer, that's definitely a symptom of ASD. So Deadpool, to be honest, if you said he was a bad guy, no one would remarkably disagree with you. It really determines on your upbringing, nature versus nurture, a whole lot of things. Judy says Dexter. Dexter's another prime example. A serial killer that kills bad guys. I don't know. Or Snape from Harry Potter. He's not nice to Harry Potter, but he's doing it for a good reason. When things are so nuanced, it's challenging for any of us. But with ASD, everything is extra challenging. Theos even had his reasons. Yeah, agreedly, life choices make a huge difference. Appropriate diet, good sleep, routine, avoiding toxic people. Absolutely. Do you have difficulty keeping attention when you are doing dull work? ADHD, 100%. Dull work just doesn't stimulate the brain. With ASD, that's not the case. But is it dull? I think dull is depending on the individual. But a lot of the time, we have people in our office who absolutely hate doing admin. And I'm one of them. But we also have people who love doing autism, love doing admin, and they tend to have autism. maybe that's a generalization, or maybe that's just from the very small sample size that I've witnessed. But sometimes doing a repetitive task time and time again is therapeutic, is very relaxing. And this is definitely where one is for autism, one is for ADHD. These two tend not to overlap that much. I know this is sounding a bit repetitive, but the idea is that you firmly understand what is one, what is the other, and where it's blurry. So this one, how many friends do you have? How many people do you call a close friend? You'd pick up the phone with and tell them that it's all going bad. So we've got, as ASD, I have no issues thinking Dexter is a good guy when he kills killers. There is a old thing where people used to say people with autism have less empathy, but it's actually been proving that they have more empathy because they think multi-like dimensional. They do not take things at face surface and dig in a bit deeper. DC says, I need admin, but I'm bad at it. Also struggle with being told what to do, but need direction. Yes, that's a really good example, DC, of having both, where it can actually be more challenging than just having one, because they're both like pulling and pulling at each other, and it's the brain wants one thing but the other part wants the other, and this is why being a burnout. Most viewers said you have about 3 to 6 friends, and this is very common on both. This is for autism and ADHD, okay? So if you struggle with friends, very much both. A lot of the time you think people with ADHD, because they really can be very energetic, very bubbly, assume they have lots of friends. But actually, unfortunately, that can alienate people because it annoys others and they kind of get very frustrated. So it's very much isolating. And autism, it's if you don't speak the same language as you would, it's challenging. So this one is for both, but maybe for different reasons. And if you have both ASD and ADHD, you can imagine that it would make it particularly challenging. Yeah, so we've got, it feels like an angel slash devil, you know, when you got one on each shoulder. That's a really, really good visual image. Sometimes creating a plan, but sometimes throw it out because I can't focus on the task. Yep. What was the last thing you lost? This can be ADHD. And if you lose things quite often, think of it like the brain doesn't consider it important. So I've got my hairbrush, right? I'm always losing it because when I put it down somewhere, my brain does not consider that important information, so it forgets it. Whereas with ASD, typically, please remember just typically, it tends to be that you remember, you have a really good memory. And this is because the brain kind of like makes a database and like organizes things. So I'm always losing things. However, when I was younger, I knew every single Pokemon and its size, shape, number, color, you know, everything, or every type of dinosaur. So it's why in some areas you can be like a crazy genius knowing every single planet in order, and in the other hand, you forgot where you put the remote. You literally just changed the channel and you can't find the remote. Oh, wow, there's some good examples of people losing something like a hat. And this is repetitive tasks. This can be with autism because repetition, again, can be a very relaxing, a therapeutic thing. With ADHD, if the brain's getting a kick out of it, it'll keep doing it. So this, again, can overlap. What I'm noticing from a lot of these questions is that though the reasoning behind why they happen are quite different, the outcome is quite similar. So ADHD and autism are not like, ADHD is not part of the autism spectrum, but they overlap so heavily, it can make it very hard to distinguish one between the other. So let's say, for example, some of you have been diagnosed with autism. It might be worth looking at support techniques for ADHD and see if they help you. I'm not saying you need to go out and get a second diagnosis, but maybe a different approach to supporting yourself might work well. Or with ADHD, if you might look at support techniques for autism, and it could be beneficial to you. Could also be a symptom of OCD, absolutely. And with neurodiversity, it all intertwines. Here is a lovely summary. Today's been a bit of a messy one, and I think it's because the answer is messy. There's not a clear answer. I know a lot of you just wanted like, all right, Nat, do I have autism? Do I have ADHD? I'll go home now. It's not like that. The likelihood is the spectrum's really wide. It all links, and some things happen in both conditions, and some things happen in both, but for very different reasons. So ADHD and autism can be mistaken for each other. I'm not saying all of you have been diagnosed wrong, but just know it is possible. And if you think you have been wrongly labelled, which I do not like that term, but there we are, you might want to follow up on it with your GP. 30 to 50% of people with ASD or ASC also have symptoms of ADHD. So you're far more likely to have ADHD if you have autism than if you didn't have autism at all. And this is similar stats for any neurodivergence. If you have one, the likelihood of having another one is quite high. Autism and ADHD are both genus. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but essentially what that means is the genes can differ in different people. I mentioned it earlier, but we've yet to find the gene that connects it for every single person. Probably why there's so many different forms of autism and it looks so different in people. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done on the science front. Nah, it's summer. Oh god. Yes, summer E. Yeah, it was intentional. I purposely meant summer E because it's sunny. Autism is a lifelong condition, yet 1/3 to 2/3 of ADHD will last into adulthood. Do you grow out of it? Do you just get better at masking? I think the jury's still out on that, but just be aware that it's it will help you understand. If you had a lot of symptoms of autism as a child and you no longer do, maybe you had ADHD. Support is nuance and is not a one size fits all. Maybe you want to try support for autism, maybe support for ADHD, maybe it's a combination. Maybe if you do one for one, it makes something else worse or easier. It really is very unique. If any of you, I only mention this briefly because it's what we do as an organisation and it allows us to keep delivering these sessions for free. But if any of you are based in the UK and are in employment and would like a free assessment in the workplace, we can get that free via a government grant. We unfortunately can't get diagnosis reports. They're really expensive and hard to get hold of, but you can get a similar support and structure in place in the workplace. Just get in contact with us if you think this is something you'd like to hear a little bit more about. If any of you have any burning questions or anything I can maybe shed some light on or any comments in general, now's a really good time to hear. Okay, S, can you help me with access to work? Absolutely. Get in touch and we will do all the paperwork for you and we'll help get the assessment done and be the same people to train you. So it's one person for everything. Dee says, exceptional individuals really helped me understand what support I could use at work. Turns out many of my normals are not, and my struggles could have been adaptations. I like that. Do you have to be diagnosed to access support for you guys? Ro, good question. No. All we require is for you to resonate. Resonate is a lot of the things I said today you struggle with, but also would benefit from. Anya, do you have a question?
Yes, can I say it? English is my second language, so it's easier to speak. There are two questions, but maybe it's one. It's related. I have both, and I recently been prescribed antidepressants, and I experience them I feel worse and worse. And I found something just a few days ago: a connection between ADHD and low blood pressure, which actually went worse in my case. And I'm really struggling with GP and, it's really hard. And I found some information within the ADHD groups and ASD about bad influence of serotonin with people with ADHD. I wonder if you have any information about, low blood pressure and serotonin and ADHD.
That is a question which I'm definitely not qualified to answer. But what I can say very generally is that medication doesn't work for everyone. So sometimes there could be negative side effects, and other time there is a biological link. So though I unfortunately do not have the knowledge to answer your question currently, I do know, like I mentioned earlier, with dyslexia, for example, you're also more likely to have allergies and a poor immune system. So the fact that is there a relation between low blood pressure and ADHD? There very well could be. And it's definitely something I'm going to go away today and research and would happy to update you if I find any additional information. But I wouldn't like to advise you on something that I don't feel particularly knowledgeable in, if that's okay.
Sure, I will email you. I meant to email you before, but my health went worse. So
Oh
thank you
no,
so much.
please do. Please, yeah, send me an email, and that'd be really useful.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a few more questions. I have hypermobile EDS, and it's starting to get proven that hypermobility and neurodiversity are very common. Yes, really, really common that a lot of things overlap. And I think how much we understand about neurodiversity is just the tip of the iceberg. Can you please give me an email address? Absolutely. Oh, I think autism spectrum condition and ADHD should work together as they complement each other, especially in social outings and support groups. Thanks. I agree so too. Oh, this is a webinar. If you're able to click on the link, please do. But we have the brief history of ADHD coming up in a few weeks, and I think you'd all find this particularly interesting. It's been a fun old journey with ADHD. We've come leaps and bounds, but there's also been some pretty outrageous ways of treating people. So what happens next? Here's my email address. Mine is just nat@accept.co.uk. And Rafa says, I just wanted to share with everyone, life can improve once I got diagnosed, purely because my 13-year-old son was diagnosed once I was diagnosed with ADHD. Yes, it is hereditary, so it does run in the family. At age 51 years old. They went onto medication and was focused, slowed down my speech, then was appointed as CEO at age 55. Performed well in my career, but struggled getting promoted till I was put on medication. I think that's a really good point. And though I'm not here to recommend any medication, it definitely can be a tool that can support some people. But also, there's things like just healthy eating, exercise, but never ever look down on people for taking medication. I take medication for anxiety, and I was very, very against it for a very long time. And it's a massive step to admit that you need a little extra help. Any other questions? Is very interesting. Physical health conditions with neurodivergence. Hope we will see a workshop on this in the future. Do you know what? We don't have one planned, but I definitely would like to do that as well. I try to do workshops on things that I feel confident in, that I have personal life experience. However, I'm definitely keen to get more collaborations in. So if any of you ever want to collaborate, please get in touch. Emma says, I have low blood pressure and hypermobility too. I just subscribed to your YouTube channel. Yes, like and subscribe. Ring that bell for notifications. All right, well, that was a lot. Any other questions? I see there's another. Oh, Anya. Or is that the same one? All right.
Well, there was two of us.
Two, yeah. Okay, do the other one, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, okay, sorry about that. I was just wondering whether vestibular issues, like I heard that it's related to autism. So yeah, I was just curious about that. I mean, I know about the proprioception with joint hypermobility, but I didn't realize that was an ASD thing as well. So just wondering if you had any information on that.
Sorry, on what is connected?
Vestibular issues, like your sense of balance.
Oh, but yeah. So there's a strong link between all of these and dyspraxia. So coordination, they all go hand in hand. And there's the workshop I did recently, which is now on YouTube, which the science of dyslexia, I think is quite a good starting point to understand from a scientific level, why do these things even happen? And we do have the science of autism coming up, but that's in the distant future. But if that's something you're really interested in, I definitely recommend going on our Eventbrite page and signing up to that, because I'm already starting the research on it now, and it's a really fascinating area.
Is there anything specific on like how ASD presents in women on your site?
Yes, there is actually. We've got 3 webinars. One called Dyslexia. We've got autism in XX/YX, and also ADHD in male and females. So we're basically looking into how it is different depending on your sex. But again, it's a little bit in the future, but do check out our Eventbrite, and we're always adding new events, but we're trying to dive in deeper to questions which you just can't find on the internet that well. At the moment, we've been doing the basics, but we're going to be starting to dive in a lot deeper into questions which may not necessarily have defined answers.
Awesome, thank you.
No worries. And Sanjan says, it's surprising that many hospital consultants don't know there is a connection between body health and neurodivergence. There needs to be better medical training. Absolutely. Just because someone is a professional doesn't mean they're an expert in everything. It's very much an emergent area, but these conversations, I learn a lot from all of you. But I really hope you found today useful, or at least started to provoke some questions in your head and to start asking yourself, why does my brain work the way it works? Could this be a symptom of one thing or another thing? Or does it even matter? Or maybe you could ask yourself, well, if I'm struggling, maybe I could try support for a different neurodivergence, and maybe that would resonate with my brain and allow me to be the best version of myself. All right, well, thank you so much. And oh yeah, Judy says, first time I come into a contact with exceptional individuals. Thanks for the webinar. Really interesting to see what you're doing. Well, we'd love to have you again. I'm going to go now. I would say enjoy the sun, but I'll probably melt. So I'll probably enjoy it from a safe distance. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Cool.